Welcome to the Holistic Career Change Podcast. Spoiler alert, we don't discuss conventional, linear, boring career change here. This is the place where we talk about finding an aligned career path that feels like an extension of who you are, where you get paid for being yourself. Forget personality quizzes, soul-crushing scrolling on job sites, and breaking your brain trying to find your why. Join me and many other career changers who've changed their career holistically by first defining who they are at their core and then using this blueprint to design a fulfilling career or business. We use the mind-body-soul approach, and we take into consideration the complexity and multidimensionality of all that you are and want to represent in the world. This is where purpose-led careers are born and built. I'm your host, Vilma Oseita. Let's go. Hi, friends. Happy Monday if you're listening to this in real time. You know I love Mondays, but I'm not going to go on about that because I know it's still triggering for some people. Anyway, when it comes to career pivots or launching a business, I feel like there are two most common fears that I have heard over and over and over again over the years. And these are, number one, all kinds of financial fears. So what if I don't earn enough money? What if I have to go for a massive pay cut? Can I afford to earn less? What if I won't have sustainable income anymore? And so on and so forth. So basically everything around financial scarcity, which is, something we pick up on as we grow up because it's a conditioned fear. And then there's another aspect of this that is survival instinct, which is one of the core primal fears in the reptilian or in the primal brain, which in response will put us in a state of fight or flight. So instant dysregulation. So one big chunk of fears is the financial fears. And the second most common one, which is what I decided to dedicate this episode to, is the question or the pervasive thoughts around the theme of what if I fail? What if this is a failure? What if I invest all of this time and effort and end up not succeeding? What then? What if I end up feeling like a complete failure? And what's worse, what I end up being perceived as a failure by my environment? Because there's one thing where I feel like a failure and maybe I can handle it. But what feels like absolute death is when we think that other people will perceive us as someone who failed. And that fear is often so paralyzing and it will keep us spinning. Like when we engage with this fear, imagine it's a little bit like the image that I'm seeing. I actually saw it yesterday when I was out for a walk. Like this little dog just chasing its tail and running in circles. Like that's what it feels like when we succumb to this fear. So if this is one of those fears that you have, this episode is for you. I really would urge you to listen to this till the very end, because I want to firstly unpack the anatomy of this fear a little and validate it for you because it is big. And then I'd love to offer you some perspective shifts and some strategies to help you release or at least neutralize this paralyzing fear. So please listen till the end because this is something that comes up over and over again. And again, it doesn't just have to be related to career change. It's applicable to everything that we're starting fresh. It could be a relationship. It could be relocation. It could be so many things. But the core of this fear and the mechanism of how it works is usually the same. Okay. So let's start with why does the fear of failure feels so massive? Caps lock, massive. It's so big. And since you know that I'm a fan of holistic lens, I want to look at it from several angles. Because when it comes to failure, there are psychological aspects, there are social factors, there are practical considerations, and there is some neurobiological details or neurobiological aspects that I like to share with you. And my goal with going into so much detail with it is because when we understand all the layers of this fear, it then becomes easier to work with it, and it becomes less scary, right? Because we're afraid what we don't know. We're afraid what we don't understand. So first, let's talk about the psychology of this fear. And when we think about psychology of fear of failure, we want to first understand the identity attachment in this whole conversation, because our careers often become very deeply intertwined with our identity and our self-worth. You already know that when you meet people, a lot of the times, mostly depending where they come from, but you will often be asked, what do you do? Because that's how people will understand you. They'll try to pigeonhole you. They'll try to create all of this story about you based on what you do. And when you've spent years, for instance, in academia, or you introduced yourself as a corporate lawyer or a finance director, that role then becomes a part of how you define yourself and how others will perceive you. And it can be addictive, especially if you are in positions that are deemed as respectful or something that others aspire to become. So if and when you're considering changing careers, it will threaten the very heart, the foundation of this identity, which will then create fear that you lose a core part of yourself. And our ego really does not like that. Because in a way, for our ego structures, which is built upon identity, this whole process of career change will feel like a little death, like losing a big aspect of you that has served you for years, that is giving you maybe approval and recognition and connection over the years. Which then also brings me to loss aversion. What does that mean? What it means that we as humans were naturally wired to fear losses more than we value gains, even if they're equivalent, the same gains. We are wired to emphasize and blow up the loss that we potentially will experience and diminish the wins and gains that we could experience in this situation. So it's almost like we have a biased lens to look at a potential change. It's like we feel the pain of losing something almost twice as intensely as the pleasure of gaining something similar. And when you take career change, this is so blatantly true, because what you think you might potentially lose, for example, your stability, your expertise, your status, respect, it will always feel more significant, bigger than potential gains of alignment and fulfillment and abundance. And that's why so many of you will find yourself stuck between that stability beast inside of you and this like little fairy and your higher self telling you, no, but it feels so good to feel aligned and free and fulfilled. And I promise you there's going to be money involved when you find alignment. Alignment is like we are navigating between the two. And a lot of the times the gremlin of stability will win because, again, we're naturally wired to focus on losses more. And we also need to remember the motivational triad. I do refer to it a lot in this podcast because it comes so apparently, it shows up so apparently in the topic of career change or realignment, because we are wired to seek pleasure, avoid pain, and conserve energy. This is a very primal survival mechanism that has kept our ancestors alive through the millennia. That is still, the very mechanism is still very deeply engraved in our primal brain because it served a purpose. It kept us alive. So we will always want to avoid uncertainty because uncertainty is not safe, and our brains crave familiarity. And our career changes involve a lot of liminality, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unfamiliarity. It's like navigating the in-between worlds. It's like staying for a prolonged period in a birth canal where you are like, am I staying? Am I going? Am I being birthed? What's going on? Which can bring in that significant uncertainty about whether we'll succeed in this new field, how long the transition will take, will we enjoy the new path, what if we change our mind, and so on. So this ambiguous energy will trigger the recurring anxiety in most of us. So that's another aspect of that fear of failure that I feel like we need to understand. And again, I haven't found a lot of people talk about this. And another reason why we will try to avoid failure is the good old perfectionism that I'm sure many of you are intimately acquainted with. This could be a whole separate dedicated podcast, not even an episode. This could be a podcast because, again, it's so multidimensional. There are so many aspects that we need to understand about perfectionism. But here's the thing. Growing up, and it all starts at home and then in our school system, we're conditioned and rewarded for being quote unquote good, for getting good grades and doing our work well, or getting that perfect score, because there is an illusion that is being created in those settings that there is a way how to achieve a perfect score. So we start aiming for that. And as a result, many professionals will develop these perfectionistic tendencies. Again, it usually starts at home, but our systems will add on to those tendencies where we'll end up fearing that anything less than excellent will reflect poorly on us. So when we're considering new careers, so quote unquote starting over, then often to us means being a beginner again, which feels threatening to these perfectionistic tendencies that fear judgment for not being immediately competent, immediately perfect, immediately successful. This is where that impatience and wanting to quantum leap a lot of the times comes from, is our inability to be in between. And a lot of the times, perfectionism is avoidance to feel our feelings. So by performing, quote unquote, perfectly, we think that we are protecting ourselves from feeling inadequate, right? So when you add all of those layers together that I've just walked you through, no wonder many of us are terrified of failing. And these are just, by the way, psychological factors, and I'm only taking now just the top ones, right? We could even go deeper with this. And then on top of that, these psychological aspects are often strengthened by certain social factors. For example, say fear of judgment. Big one. We worry about how others will perceive our career changes. Will they question our decisions? Another big one that I've noticed that comes up a lot. Will my colleagues think that I couldn't handle my previous career? Did they think that I am not good enough, that it was too much for me, that I was weak, that I was incompetent again? Or, for instance, we're worried if our social status will change if we take a more junior position in a completely new field, or if we launch a business, will we still be respected? Because, well, we think, right, that's kind of the logic. Well, anyone can launch a business, right? If you ask me, very wrong. Not everyone can do that, but that's a completely different topic again. Another social shackle that I've noticed is comparing and despairing. Say you choose a new niche and you obviously have access to social media. So what happens then when you choose a niche? You may go there and you start looking at those people who are successful in your niche and you start using their success against your potential and against your growth. And then it's very tempting to be like, well, they're already big. There's no space for my ideas. They took up all of their market. So they already have my idea. I should think of something else. And then what happens? We get deterred from aligned paths because we think that something that we're launching or introducing or doing should be completely original. And if someone has done it, that's a sign that we should pivot, which could not be further from the truth. Especially, again, if you're moving into healing professions, if you see someone who's also a trauma-informed coach working with inner child, that doesn't mean you can't do the same thing. Because even if you think about it logically, these people, no matter how successful they are, they can serve so many people. If we talk about like one-on-one clients and they only have a one-on-one practice, the max clients that they could have is probably at one time like 20 clients max, maybe 30 clients a week max. There are how many people in the world? Yes, thank you. Nearly 8 billion, I think, at this point. Don't quote me on that because I don't know. I actually haven't researched that. So there's no way that even if someone is doing the exact thing as you are doing, that they can meet the demand that there is for this work. On top of that, they are not you. They have different energy. They have different perspective. They have different trauma. They have a different lived experience. So in and of itself, even if they're talking about the same thing, the flavor, the spice, the energy that they're adding to their work is different than you are. And both of you are needed. Okay. And another thing when it comes to those things that I've noticed is even if you're not comparing yourself to them, meaning like, okay, they're doing the same thing, great. You can reframe that and say, well, that's a proof to my fearful brain that whatever it is that I'm considering doing, there's a market for that because clearly they're successful. But then what they do, there's another sneaky pattern that kicks in. They start looking at the amount of, say, content that they are producing, the quality of the content. Maybe they also have a podcast and we're thinking that we should get to where they're at right away from the very beginning. And then we look at our own production, our own content in this example, and we're like, well, our posts are not pretty enough. We don't have enough episodes. We need to hurry up. And then there is a sense of urgency and we start tripping on the work and we start losing the alignment. So if you're recognizing yourself here, please make sure to pause, breathe, and go back to your aligned path, okay? Plus, another piece that I want to mention off, while you are over here trying to say establish your new career or business, and then you see your peers from, say, previous industry advancing in their established careers, and you feel like you were just here starting over, square one, it can really trigger a lot of fears of failing and falling behind or making a mistake. And yes, even make you really doubt the choice that you have, even if there are moments when you feel like this is the right direction, you're ecstatic about it. Seeing other people succeed, even if these fields are misaligned, may make you doubt yourself. And I even remember myself when I was transitioning and I'd see my colleagues from, say, management consulting or banks getting promoted quickly. I was so triggered seeing that because I'd had thoughts like, well, this probably would be me had I stayed. And for the longest time at the beginning, I was even avoiding to check LinkedIn because I didn't want to get triggered and would literally have to coach myself to remind myself why I'm choosing alignment. And fun fact, not that I am happy about this, but fun fact, some of these people that I'd compare myself against in these previous industries that I was working in, they have ended up switching their careers themselves or have confided in me how unhappy and unfulfilled they felt, even as they were getting promotions and massive pay increases. So when you see other people move through the ranks, this is a reminder for you, you never know what they're actually going through. Because we live in a culture of performative action, and not everything is gold that glitters. So this is a reminder to you if you're worried that you'll be leaving behind a potentially successful career. On top of that, another thing that I've noticed, we also have certain cultural considerations that we want to factor in when we're going through the career change and we're afraid to fail. And obviously a big caveat here, I'm a white female, I'm from Northeast Europe, so my experience when it comes to certain cultural backgrounds is obviously limited to my perspective. So as per usual, I'm not sharing anything in absolute terms. What I can share and what I am sharing is my experience and patterns that I've noticed working with clients from different cultural backgrounds. And I've seen how career decisions can carry such different weight depending on where you're from or where your family is coming from. For some of my clients, for example, changing careers isn't just a personal choice. It's something that affects almost like their family honor challenges generational expectations, or even it goes against what their community sees as quote unquote a respectable path. For example, I've worked with clients from South Asian backgrounds where, for example, being a doctor or an engineer isn't just a job, it's almost like a family commitment. For example, in India, I was doing some research. Around 80% of parents, even to this day, still prefer these fields for the children over any other option. So when you've been raised, imagine in a culture where your career reflects on your entire family status in the society, and maybe your parents have invested up to like 20%, around 15% of their income in your education specifically for these certain prestigious fields, that creates a whole different level of pressure. Similarly, I've also had clients from East Asian cultures where concepts like faith and filial piety, meaning that leaving a secure position to pursue something more fulfilling, can actually trigger intense family dynamics and can really disappoint your family. In these contexts, your career isn't viewed just as, again, a personal journey, but is seen as like dishonoring, disrespecting the sacrifices that your family has made for you. How about that? Or even for clients from Middle Eastern backgrounds, I haven't had a lot of them, but I've had a few. I've noticed how career prestige can also be highly gendered. And so men often, and obviously I'm generalizing, right? So don't come at me. I'm generalizing. This is what I'm noticing. But a lot of the times men will face, say, pressure towards business or medicine or engineering again. And women sometimes are still expected to choose, quote unquote, like appropriate fields like education or healthcare, right? And even if we look like Gulf countries, around 80% of nationals in some of these Gulf countries still prefer and still work in public sector because of the perceived security and prestige. And the idea then of leaving governmental jobs for entrepreneurial ventures, that can come with enormous cultural pressure because that's not considered always as prestigious. Again, generalizing, right? And we also want to think about immigrants, and like I've had immigrant clients see the ones who immigrated into the States, and wow, their stories have taught me so much. For them, career change can carry this whole additional layer of complexity because many of their parents or grandparents quite literally have sacrificed everything to move countries specifically so that the next generation could have better opportunities. Talk about sacrifice. I'm literally having goosebumps as I'm saying this. So when you're the child of immigrants who gave up their homeland, their social connections, sometimes even their professional status, a lot of them in their home countries sometimes worked in higher education or had really prestigious jobs. And so they come to this new country and they sacrifice everything just so you could have a better life. So choosing to leave a stable, prestigious career can feel almost like betraying their sacrifice. For instance, I had once a client whose parents had escaped political persecution and they had worked multiple minimal wage jobs. They were working all the time. They lived in a tiny apartment for years, all so she could become a lawyer. That's kind of was their path that they wanted for her. And when she was extremely unhappy, when she started having really serious health concerns over that misaligned career, and she wanted to leave law to become a therapist, she felt such crushing guilt, like she was throwing away everything that they had suffered for. So for immigrant families, certain careers aren't just about status. They're almost like visible proof that the immigration journey was worth it. And they're validation of, one of the biggest decisions that a family can make. So, again, these are just a couple of examples, and I'm sure there are many of them, and I can't list all of them here. But what I've learned is that these cultural layers aren't just external pressure. They become woven into our own identity, our sense of duty, and our definition of what success is, right? And what I've noticed, because we have different cultures, right? But what I've noticed that individuals that come more from the collectivist cultures, like certain Asian countries, Latin America, they experience almost 40% more anxiety during career transitions than those from more individualistic, like Western backgrounds. And that is largely because of the family and social pressures. So when we're contemplating career changes, we're not just then battling our own fears, we're sometimes navigating this very complex cultural landscapes that have been shaping us since childhood. So again, this is kind of like a layered cake. When you add all of those layers, if you're someone who feels a lot of pressure, if you're someone who is terrified of failure, first and foremost, I never want you to gaslight yourself or allow others to gaslight you and tell you that you shouldn't feel this intense fear of failure, this intense fear of disappointing others when you're choosing a new career path. Because what you're feeling is a very valid, a very healthy response to such a massive change in your circumstances. And these are just the psychological and social factors that will affect the fear of failure or that will contribute to the fear of failure. And I haven't even mentioned the practical considerations like feeling financially vulnerable, because career changes can involve financial risk. Now, obviously, as you already know, my approach and the way I advocate for the career change is by reducing, minimizing, or completely removing financial fear and financial instability during the change, especially if you're opting for gradual transitions. But obviously, feeling vulnerable is still there. And then there's also something that we don't always think about or understand is the time investment piece, because many women will be so worried about how much time it will take to transition, especially when many of them have limited resources. So the fear of potentially wasting years just to discover that this new path perhaps isn't right, that can be paralyzing. And many, especially those who misunderstand the essence of aligned work, which is a lot of the times, it's something aligned work essentially means that we are naturally gifted at it already, even if we lack some technical skills. That's what aligned work is. But for those who don't understand it yet, they only see the surface level skill gap between where they are and where they think that they need to be. What I need for this new career, that can feel overwhelming because it feels like there's so much to learn and do and experience and achieve. And that learning curve can appear much, much steeper when you're looking at it from the bottom up than it actually is. Because again, aligned career transitions are much, much quicker. That is something that I preach and teach. And that's why some of my clients can transition in a matter of months. We're not even talking years, a matter of months when we find that aligned career for them. And on top of that, from the neurobiological perspective, fear of failure activates the amygdala. Many of you are well-read and educated and listen to a lot of podcasts, so I'm sure you've heard about the amygdala. This is our brain's threat detection center, if you will. So the amygdala, this then triggers stress responses that can actually impair the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is the region that's responsible for long-term decision-making and planning, making it harder then to clearly think about career transitions. So for example, in my Holistic Career Change group program, which is weekly coaching, weekly group coaching, plus a weekly module. So every week a new module drops around a certain aspect or phase of career change. Some of the modules, especially towards the end, when we talk about the transition strategies and how to prepare for transition, have super simple advice. When it comes to, say, researching and testing the new career path before you transition, when it comes to collecting data to make informed decisions for the future. It's all so simple. And the reason why I include it sometimes very common sense, straightforward, step-by-step advice for career changers is because I've seen so many times how super intelligent, capable, experienced women start spinning and they start getting confused and tripping around the most straightforward next steps. And that is because the prefrontal cortex gets compromised when we're exposed to this fear of failure. All right, so that's a big one. So as you can see, there are many legitimate reasons as to why this fear that perhaps you too have been feeling at times can feel so big and overwhelming. I've even seen career change efforts completely stall because career changers didn't know how to overcome this fear, or they didn't understand it. They didn't know what hit them. And in order to justify their lack of commitment or motivation to work on their career change, because it's, the visual that I'm getting is like an octopus. Like fear of failure is like an octopus. It has many tentacles. And so it just, when it gets hold of you, it gets hold of you, okay? And you don't even know what hit you. But because they didn't understand the essence of this fear, they would then, in order to justify, like I said, their lack of commitment, they would just tell themselves, oh, it didn't work out because perhaps the direction wasn't right. False. The direction was right. You were just paralyzed by the fear octopus. Okay. So what will happen to avoid feeling like a failure, many of us, and I really want you to listen to this. I've said this before, but I feel like it hits like a different spot every time. In order to avoid feeling like a failure, many of us will fail ahead of time. Hi, beautiful humans. I'm going to quickly interrupt our regular programming for something I'm so genuinely excited to share with you. You know those moments when you're recording a podcast about aligning with your authentic design and suddenly you realized you should probably tell your listeners about the program that you've created that does exactly that. Yes, this is one of those moments. So if what we're discussing today is resonating with you, and if you're nodding along thinking, yes, I need this kind of guidance for my career transition too, I've created something special. The Holistic Career Change Group Program is officially opening its doors again, and I'd love for you to be part of it. It's an all-in-one, one-stop shop, 5-month career change bootcamp where I've thought of everything for you. I've packed nearly a decade of my experience working with career changers and structured it all into bite-sized, easy-to-implement steps, from dealing with imposter syndrome to getting clarity on your most aligned career path to creating a practical transition plan that takes care of your financial well-being. The program will combine really powerful one-on-one coaching sessions where we will dive deep into your specific challenges with a supportive group element where you connect with your like-minded sisters who will be changing careers alongside you. And you will develop clarity around your unique gifts. You'll learn to navigate transitions with confidence instead of fear, and you'll create a strategic action plan that honors your energetic design. I really wish this existed when I was changing my career. Unlike traditional career coaching, we will address both the practical aspects and the energetic, spiritual, and emotional components that most programs overlook when it comes to career change. So if you're feeling called to explore this path, I've created a waiting list so you can join right now and be the first one to learn about the program details. All you need to do is scroll down, find the show notes, and click on the link where you'll be able to join the waiting list and get all the juicy details. Okay, the announcement is over. Now let's get back to our episode. I promise it's worth the wait. And hey, if human design has taught me anything, it's that manifestors need to inform, projectors need to be invited, and podcasters, we just need to interrupt. In order to feel like a failure, we will fail ahead of time. And that will happen and manifest itself by not properly even trying to transition and making this new career successful. Or we will fail ahead of time by putting in these half-assed measures, half-assed efforts, treating it as I'll work on it when I have time. I'll work on it when I feel like it. I'll work on it when I feel motivated, which never happens. And then they say, they'll begin starting things, but never completing their efforts. They'll be changing their minds all the time, coming up with the new ideas. All of that is just distraction strategy, but they will never see those efforts properly through till the end. They will never properly implement. And then they'll justify it with, well, I tried, but it didn't work. I did things. Okay, how many hours did you work on this? What does your calendar look like? What have you actually done? Or like if someone is moving into like a healing career, now I say this a lot because I know a lot of you are wanting to move into healing, like coaching or energy work or whatever. And they'll be like, well, Vilma, I still haven't got a client. I'll be like, okay, how many offers did you make? How many times did you post? How many people did you speak to and told them that you're coaching? Like, what are the objective results that you've created? And they usually be like, well, I haven't offered anyone. I mean, I did post a story that disappeared in 24 hours. I'm like, great. So how do you expect to have a result when the work that you're doing is in your head, but it doesn't translate in the actual action? So no, you didn't actually try. And if some of you are feeling called out, this comes with a lot of love. Because so often we end up lulling ourselves into this false sense of security, lying to ourselves that we're doing the work. No, we're not. So you pretended that you tried, but all along you were simply avoiding to feel uncomfortable and uncertain. And this is not me shaming you. This is me validating. That's why I have this whole episode dedicated to fear of failure, because of how strong it is and how it will manifest in your day-to-day action or mostly inaction. So we really want to at least be honest with ourselves if we can't be honest with other people. So what now, you say? Okay, so we've analyzed this fear. We've explained it from different angles. And I really hope that me unpacking it allowed you to see the nuance that this fear contains within. And I really hope that as you've been listening to this, you've already identified which angles, which tentacles have the hold on you the most, because usually we will have a few of these aspects that I've shared with you that will have the strongest hold on us. Okay, so first, to neutralize this fear, and by the way, again, I want to say this is something that I feel like some people will create this unreasonable expectation we can rid of this fear. I don't believe we can get rid of this fear. We don't want to remove this fear because that keeps us alive. So I don't think it's realistic because it does serve a purpose and we don't want to disregard it. But what we can do, what we can aspire to do is to neutralize it at least a little bit. So it would allow us to show up more consistently and with more intention in this new effort in whatever it is that we're creating. And hey, perhaps even neutralizing this fear will allow you to enjoy this process of transition, this process of career rebirth in launching new, beautiful, aligned creations into this world. Because at the end of the day, if it's not fun, it's probably not worth it. Oh my goodness. So how do you work with it? I'm going to share with you two things. First of all, I want to share with you some reframes, some perspective shifts, and then I want to share some practical strategies or exercises to help you neutralize this fear. So when it comes to offering alternative perspectives, I'm going to share my favorite so you can pick and mix which works for you, and you'll know what will work for you is by how your body will feel when you are trying it on for size. What you're looking for is almost an exhale, a relief, almost like weight lifted off your heart. You want to work with those perspectives that give you a somatic, visceral release or response in your body. So first, I want you to consider, this is a really good one. What guidance, if say someone is fearful or you're fearful in this situation, what guidance would you offer to your own children, or if you don't have children, other young people that you care about when they are facing a similar fear or a similar dilemma in their lives? Say if your child, or again, another young person that you love, came to you with the same fears about changing careers, what advice would you give them? For example, would you tell them to stay in a career that doesn't fulfill them for the sake of security? Or would you encourage them to pursue what lights them up? Or anything in between? What would you tell them? Really pause and try to answer that. And if your children saw how you are approaching these crossroads that you're probably in if you're listening to this podcast, What lesson would they learn about courage, about authenticity, about following their own path? You guys, I so love this reframe because it often reveals that there is this massive gap most of us have between how compassionate and encouraging we are when it comes to others, especially the ones that we love and we believe in, versus how hard we can be on ourselves. And we typically wouldn't tell someone we love to stay trapped in a situation that, I don't know, suffocates their spirit, that drains their life force energy. We couldn't bear to see them unhappy and living below their potential. And yet, in the same breath, we often impose those expectations on ourselves. Why? And I'd love for you to pause and really answer honestly if your child or someone you love would ask you what to do if they were in the exact same situation. What would you tell them, and why do you struggle to tell the same thing yourself? And this lens also, by the way, connects your personal values and personal choices to the legacy that you want to create within your family or community. Because sometimes making a brave choice isn't just for you. It's about modeling what's possible for others, being an example of what's possible. And a lot of you who are mission purpose driven, for many of you, connecting with the bigger why may be much more motivating than just thinking about your personal gains. Should you pursue this path? Thinking about how you will impact your environment and collective as a whole may give you that motivational spark to actually pursue that and strength to overcome the fear of failure. Another perspective, which is the good old chestnut, is the deathbed perspective. Now, I've mentioned of it before, and honestly, I still refer to it myself whenever I'm faced with what others would consider quote unquote, like irresponsible, illogical, crazy decisions in my life. So it's all about imagining yourself at the end of your life. And honestly, we don't even know when that day is for us, but it's about looking back and asking yourself, will you regret the chances you didn't take versus the failures you experienced? Would you rather look back on a life where you played it safe or where you pursued what truly mattered to you? And if you stay in your current career for another, 20, 30 years, how will that feel when you reflect on your life? I still remember to this day, there were two key decisions in my life. And by the way, just heads up, I'm not someone who usually has regrets, and I'm not someone who thinks about should have, could have. I usually move on really quickly. It's just the way that it's my makeup. It's the way that I'm made. It's not even a trauma response. Trust me. I dived into that. I try to understand it's my makeup. But there are two decisions that had I listened to my truth, my intuition, my alignment, I would have made. But because I was listening to the outside forces, other people telling me what should be a logical, quote unquote, safe decision, I decided not to pursue them. And had I pursued those two opportunities, my life would look completely different right now. And not to say that it would be better or worse, it would just be different. And as you know, many studies and many books have been written about those end-of-life regrets, and they're usually all around the same sentiment. I wish I had the courage to live a life that is true to myself. I wish I didn't listen to others. I wish I loved more. I wish I experienced more. So this is such a powerful exercise to check in. What would you regret more? Because at the end of the day, as gruesome as it sounds, it doesn't effing matter. We're all dying. We're exiting through the same exit. All of us, whether we had a steady paycheck and quote unquote security, whether we lived the life according to the program, or whether we lived out our wildest adventure. So why not create this wild adventure of a life? My client and I were laughing the other day. We're like, it's not that serious. It's all made up Anyway, it's all illusion. So why not follow the heart? Why not have the experience? Why not feel all of the feelings? Which then brings me to another perspective shift that I love for you to think about. Again, is quite overlooked when we're making decisions because we so often focus on the risks of change, but we completely forget to evaluate the real costs of staying put. Because staying put, there is a cost to inaction when we stay put. So you want to ask yourself, what is the emotional cost of remaining in work that doesn't fulfill you? What will it actually cost you? Because a lot of the times when we look at, oh my gosh, I lose the status, I lose identity, I may risk my financial stability, but what will the cost be of staying as you are? How might staying in this misaligned career affect your health, your relationships, your overall well-being over time because it accumulates, especially your health? Because misalignment is very, very, very expensive, and it has a tendency to slowly but surely creep into all areas of our lives. And it almost like it desensitizes us. I don't know how else to put it, but the more we stay, the more almost like zombie-like we become, lifeless, robotic, incapable of seeing beauty and feeling the joy of being alive, right? I remember when in one of my last positions, one of my last jobs, when I was in the government, I worked in finance and government, and I remember I literally would have almost like out of body experiences. Like I would see myself go through motions the day in and day out, but it's almost like I wasn't even there. I was so disembodied and dysregulated and disconnected. And those 3 years that I held this position, it flew by like a day because I was literally repeating the same day in and day out. Like it's almost like it was all a dream. It's so weird to remember that. And I was completely misaligned. It's almost like my soul wasn't even there, even though it was, but it felt like my soul left the body. It was like, I'm not participating in this BS. So when it comes to your inaction, you want to think about what opportunities, what experiences and growth are you sacrificing by not making this change? And as per usual, if you want to journal this out, I really would recommend journaling it out as you're answering to the questions, because trust me, journaling will give you much more awareness. It will allow you to connect the dots. And a lot of the times we don't even need to do any other work. Just seeing things clearly is already enough to create a shift in how you show up and how you think. Another perspective that would be fun to explore and to neutralize that fear of failure is childhood wisdom. Now, a lot of us will tune into the future self, and I'm a fan of the future self work. But what is really fun to do sometimes is to connect with the wisdom of our younger selves. What would your 10-year-old self think about, say, what you do now for work? What dreams did you have before you learned about the quote unquote practical, respectful careers? And are there any natural talents or interests that you've had since childhood that might be trying to re-emerge? Just think about, like, when you connect to the spirit, to the energy of your 10-year-old self, like, what would they be excited about? Would they be proud of you seeing where you are right now? What advice would they give you? Usually it's so simple, so heartfelt, and so true. It's so healing to connect to that version of yourself. And a lot of the times it's emotional. But so valuable to understand, to reconnect with the dreams before they were crushed by the reality of things. And just in general, when you think about your life, you really want to think about what would make a fantastic story. Because I bet you have these experiences that you can like conjure up now, that you remember when you look back at the craziest, seemingly irresponsible or unusual chapters of your life that perhaps made little sense to others. Aren't you so glad that you have them in your memory bank and you can now laugh about it and share with others? Don't you just feel so much richer because you've experienced them? And isn't that what we're all here for? Experience things. I love this. Like I said, I absolutely love this chapter of my life in Northern Iceland, which makes zero absolute sense. I was scrubbing toilets and serving horse steaks for people, even though I had all of these fancy degrees. There were moments in there when I would have to pinch myself and be like, how did I end up here? But every experience that I had, the connections that I had with people there, like working in the kitchen and serving, being in service as a staff member, like serving people their food, the connections and the camaraderie that I got to experience with these colleagues, it's honestly just makes my heart so warm every time I remember it. Like the laughs that I had, the connections, the friendships that I built. I would never, ever, ever want to delete that chapter of my life, even though it really felt nonsensical. Everyone was so confused when I did that. But it's the same here. Like it's your life. You have one life in this incarnation, at least. And we as souls, the reason why we incarnate in this physical, really messed up currently reality is to experience it all. Okay. This episode is really turning to be longer than I anticipated, but I guess that's the story of my life. So let's me move on. So we spoke about why we have this fear of failure, why it's so overwhelming, its roots run deep, what reframes or new perspectives we could apply to start shifting and neutralizing this fear. And I really would love to leave you with some more practical strategies if you feel called to work with this. And I really recommend you to work with this because this fear, the essence of this fear is applicable not just to career change, but any fear that limits the quality of your life in general. So one of my favorite strategies to work around this fear is really engaging with incremental transitions. So instead of getting overwhelmed, which many of you can go there, instead of getting overwhelmed by this big, scary end goal of this new career and just thinking like, oh my goodness, it's so big, it's so new, it's so complicated, I have no idea how to get there. We want to avoid this dramatic leaps and consider building gradual bridges between careers because that feels more doable, more approachable, and less dysregulating, and the fear of failure then feels more manageable. So for example, you can start with side projects or volunteer work in your new field. Or you can explore hybrid roles that combine the elements of both of your careers, the old one that you're still in and the new one that you're transitioning into. That's a really good one. For example, I currently have a beautiful client in the Holistic Career Change Group program, shout out to Laura, who would love to work with horses and ideally maybe kids and help them with learning, nervous system regulation, and trauma work using the horses, the horse medicine. So one of the bridges that we've been discussing with her for her is to start perhaps by looking for management positions in, say, stables or horse training facilities, because that would allow her to lean on her current experience in more of the corporate roles, but also start putting herself in environments where she's surrounded in this new industry that she's transitioning into. So this approach then reduces the financial risk. And it also allows you to build confidence incrementally and gradually, so it doesn't feel like such a massive dysregulating leap. Another, again, really straightforward strategy is creating safety nets. Because fear very often will come from uncertainty about, like we already talked about your basic security. So creating very concrete, specific safety plans can completely free you to take risks. So this could look like building an emergency fund specifically just for your transition period, identifying temporary work you could do if needed, and also something that many of you skip that I really would love to encourage you to do is mapping out your quote unquote the worst case scenario plan and the solutions that you have or plans A, B, C, D. So many of you will be afraid to go there because, again, that worst case scenario will cause a lot of unpleasant emotions, which we avoid to feel, which we're going to talk about. But often when we avoid mapping out the worst case scenario and what we would do, we give ourselves then this almost like binary black or white option is I either succeed or I die. It becomes very absolute and scary, and the fear of failure again goes back into paralyzing us. So you want to map out the worst case scenario. Say for some reason, whatever reason that doesn't even make sense now, your new endeavor does not pan out. What can you do then? Can you temporarily go back to the old job? Could you get another job? Could you line up investments should you need them in the future? Could you lean into 401k if you're in the US? Trust me, there are so many options, but your brain won't see them if you get stuck in that binary, catastrophic thinking mode. So having these contingencies in place can dramatically reduce your anxiety about change because you're like, even if it all goes to shit, I know I'll be safe. And we can't underestimate how valuable that is. Another piece, to help you with this fear, just a little strategy, is finding your transition community. You want to surround yourself with others who've successfully navigated similar changes or who are passionate about transitioning out just like you are. So their stories will provide both practical roadmaps, but also just emotional reassurance that this change is possible and you're not just being like woo-woo crazy person. And if you are, I love you because I am too. So peer support groups, career change communities, or if you want to check out the Holistic Career Change Group program that is launching on May 1st, 2025. This is a shameless plug because I really want you guys to join communities that are supportive and safe. So with this particular cohort of the group, the enrollment starts on April 14th. Again, 2025. I don't know when you're listening to this episode. And I cannot even tell you what a loving, supportive community this is because all of the women who are in the group are not only going through the same process, they're often feeling and experiencing similar feelings as they navigate this change. And sometimes really just no coaching is required. It's just a sense of you coming in to say our Monday calls and you feel understood and seen and safe to show up with all of your fears and all of your dreams here. And that is a lot of the times as career changers, spaces we don't have enough of. So on the one hand, you then have this loving support and cheerleading from your fellow career changers who just get you. They just get you. And on the other hand, you have this step-by-step process that takes your hand and leads you through all of the phases of change, from identifying new career to starting your transition. So if you feel like you want to shift, but you want structure support and a lot of love and a community, and you feel like this is the year, please check out the program details. You have the link in the show notes. Another strategy to consider is really just practicing small risk taking because that will expand your capacity to tolerate risk. Because fear of failure in big career moves often reflect general discomfort with uncertainty. So what you could try is building your uncertainty muscle. Really, it's just a muscle by taking these small risks. For example, this is, by the way, what I'm thinking. These are examples that I'm giving you, but please let your imagination run wild here, okay? Because you want to tune into your intuition or your human design authority. So for instance, you can take class in something that you've never tried before. You can have a conversation with someone in your target field or business opportunity that you're considering about, especially if you feel nervous about talking to them. So that is kind of low risk thing. Just send them a message and ask them if they have 15 minutes to donate and share with you. Or maybe publish a blog post or a Substack or IG post and share your ideas publicly. Even if your account is private, that's a safe way to start exercising and sharing your voice. So what you want to do is find ways how to just start expanding your comfort zone one baby step at a time. And this is a really great strategy for those of you who feel extremely risk averse, okay? And the final one, which is probably, I don't know, I want to say it's the most important one, but that's the one where a lot of us tend to avoid the most, which is honoring our emotions. Because there's no way we can heal without learning how to feel. It rhymes. One of the most powerful, but again, overlooked strategies for moving through career change fear is actually feeling your feelings rather than trying to bypass them. Because you do want to at least semi-regularly create space for emotional processing, especially when you feel overwhelmed. You can set aside dedicated time to simply sit with your fears, embrace your anxieties and uncertainties without immediately trying to fix them or push them away. I have, by the way, recorded an emotional processing meditation specifically for career changers because I just couldn't find one that worked for me in the way that I see this process. And in this recording, I guide you through the process of feeling, acknowledging, and releasing your emotions and sensations. If you'd like access to this meditation, feel free to message me on IG and I'll drop a link with you. The thing is that in this process, you really want to release judgment because many of us have been conditioned to see emotions like fear, uncertainty, or grief almost as a weakness. And that it's something to overcome, not to give into, right? Like a lot of the times we'll hear this, be strong, don't let this overwhelm you, don't focus on that. So it's rather something to avoid than seeing this as information to integrate. So if we try approaching our feelings with curiosity instead of judgment, everything changes. So we could say, wow, that's interesting. I feel shame when I think about stepping away from my, law career. I wonder what that's about. Versus, I shouldn't be feeling this. I should feel motivated. Why am I not feeling more confident? You really want to connect with your body because career isn't just mental. It also lives in your body, the fear around career change. Notice how you physically feel the tension, the constriction, or discomfort when you think about career changes. You want to practice gentle movement, deep breathing, body scans. All of that can release emotions stored in our physical form. And above all, by the way, please allow just those waves of emotion without trying to understand them. Just embrace them. I see this a lot. Like clients will come to me and they say, well, I felt this emotion. I wonder what it's about. I wonder what trauma is it stemming from. I wonder what that means. We tend to intellectualize a lot of our emotions, which is again, an avoidance strategy. So sometimes we don't need to know why we feel what we feel. Emotions naturally move in waves. They rise, they peak, they recede if we don't interrupt them. So when strong emotions or feelings are coming up around your career transition, see if you can just ride that wave rather than just shutting it down. Because most emotional waves, believe it or not, even the intense ones, will naturally subside within the first couple of minutes if we truly just give in to them and let them be, let them do their thing, whatever they need to do. So working with emotional body is such a game changer and usually the thing that allows us to move quicker through change. And again, it's so overlooked in my line of work, okay, I think, because many of us have been taught to approach these major life decisions purely logically, especially obviously professional contexts, like we're told to be smart about our careers. But trying to make these career changers while bypassing our emotional landscape is like trying to hold up a beach ball underwater. Like it takes constant energy and eventually the ball will pop up anyway and it will pop up with even more force. So remembering that your emotions aren't problems to fix, they are essential parts of your decision-making system. That's why in all of my work with clients, whether it's a group or this one-on-one, we talk about and we do a lot of feeling. Because when you honor your feelings as legitimate aspects of your experience, which they are, you will often find that they can become the allies rather than the obstacles in your transition. And ironically, the more we feel, the path forward often becomes clearer when we start acknowledging and feel out what's coming up. So there you have it. The full episode, which is an ode to fear of failure. I hope you found it inspiring. I hope you find it useful. If you're still listening to this episode, if you're still here with me and you haven't dropped off, well done. And I know it can all feel very overwhelming. There's a lot of information in this episode. Please, my sincere recommendation. Just choose one reframe that I've shared with you and one strategy to play with and just actually implement it. See how it feels. Because at the end of the day, we can be endlessly informed. We have so much access to information these days, but if we don't implement, nothing changes in our lived experience. And again, years go by, like for me in that governmental career, and there's no visible, tangible change in our lives because it's about implementation. Information without action becomes then just mental clutter. It's like having, all the ingredients for like a magical meal, but never actually cooking it. So it doesn't matter. It's rotting away in your fridge. It doesn't matter that you bought it. So again, you don't need to tackle everything at once or completely overhaul your life tomorrow. Start with just one small experiment. Maybe it's sitting with your feelings. If I could recommend one, I would recommend sitting with your feelings for just 5 minutes a day, or writing a letter from your 10-year-old self and asking yourself what you'd advise your child to do in your situation. Just choose one or two things. And a reminder that every tiny step that you take consistently will create momentum. And momentum is everything when we're trying to move through the fear, and especially the fear of failure. You've so got this. Have the most magical week. Thank you for spending time with me today. If you enjoy this content, please make sure you subscribe to this podcast and leave a quick review to help us share the message of aligned work with the world. And if you'd like to learn more about how to find and transition into your very own purpose-led career or business that feels like getting paid for being yourself, make sure you check out the episode notes below. Have a wonderful week.